If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the show, we'll talk with former state senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal about her bid for Missouri's St. Louis-based 1st Congressional District seat and why she's offering voters an alternative to Congresswoman Cori Bush and St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell. First, Lucas Kunce embarked on quite the political journey over the past couple of years. After coming up short in a 2022 Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate against Trudy Busch Valentine, Kunce is now trying to oust GOP U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. And this time around, Kunce possesses a massive advantage both in fundraising and endorsements over fellow Democrat State Senator Karla May. And while Missouri voters have tended to back GOP candidates for statewide posts over the past decade, Kunce is hoping to break that streak in the fall, especially as he could be running alongside a ballot initiative legalizing abortion in the state. Joining us in the studio is Lucas Kunce. The Independence resident is an attorney who spent 13 years serving in the United States Marine Corps. Lucas, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Yeah, awesome. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the biggest news of the week, month, year, decade. President Joe Biden announcing that he was bowing out of running for re-election. He endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, as did a number of other Missouri Democratic political figures. Harris is almost certainly going to be the Democratic nominee. Will you be supporting her, and what do you think of her effect on this race?
You know, I think a lot of people are really, really excited about this, and I think that they should be. It's really a historic moment, and I think the excitement's warranted. You know, as far as like endorsing or whatever else, you know, I'm asking enough people to vote for me right now that I'm not running around asking people to vote for anybody else. You know, I'm focused on my race, but I see the excitement, and I think it's really neat for everybody.
How do you think having Harris at the top of the ticket will change the general election contest against Senator Hawley? It's kind of hard to guess like how a presidential candidate is going to do like 5 months before. But you know, especially as a federal candidate, the presidential race has a major impact on races like yours. So I'd be interested to hear how it's going to affect, if at all.
You know, I think it's unlikely that, whoever the national candidates are for either party are really going to be spending a lot of time here in Missouri and doing stuff. And so, for me, I've made sure to put myself in position to beat Josh Hawley this entire time. You know, a year ago, we were in position and on track to beat him. A month ago, we were on track to beat him. And right now, we're on track to beat him. So, I'm just really excited about the fact that, my race and the abortion petition, which you just mentioned, those are going to be the real top of the ticket drivers here in Missouri. And we're both doing what it takes to win, and we're both going to win in November.
So before you get to November, you do have to get through a Democratic primary. And that leads us to one of our listener questions for you from Mama Red Hen on Reddit. Why should we choose Kunce over someone like Karla May? I feel she has more of a record and clear policies than I've seen from Kunce. We all need to get behind one candidate. Convince me to get behind you. So convince Mama Redhead on Reddit that you're the candidate.
Well, sure, Mama Redhead. What I want to do in this race and when I'm in the U.S. Senate is fundamentally change who has power in this country. And, there's a reason organizations like the AFL-CIO endorsed me earlier than they've ever endorsed a Senate challenger in this state before. And it's, just to take a minute to talk about my background, I am your classic Missourian. My parents were mid-Missouri folks, Hickman and Rockbridge. They got married at 19 and 22 years old. They were Catholic and they followed the rules. And if anybody knows what that means, right? That's kid, and that classic Missouri paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. And, for us, we lived in a working class neighborhood in mid-Missouri, and it was just, it was a really beautiful place to live. And I probably didn't even realize it until, I was about 8 years old. And this is the reason that my parents stopped at having 4 kids is because my littlest sister was born with a very serious heart condition. And, it was really, really hard on our family. She had to have open heart surgery. She was flown up here on a helicopter to St. Louis. My parents were gone a lot. And if anybody knows what happens to a paycheck-to-paycheck family, when medical bills hit in this country and in this state, it's devastating. And so, my parents went bankrupt within 2 months. It was really hard on us, and I just, I learned the strength that we have in our communities, because when my family was truly at its very lowest and we weren't sure what was going to happen, the people in that neighborhood who had no more money than we did, like no more money than we did, right? Like, this was the folks in the working class neighborhood. Our friends down at church passed the plate for us. Folks brought more food by the house than we could ever eat. While my parents were in St. Louis for weeks on end, everybody took us into their homes and took care of us. And for me, that's the strength that we have in this state. It's the strength we have in our communities when we're invested in. And when I talk about that all around the state, it seems that everybody's been a part of that on one side or the other, except for Josh Hawley. And we're going to remind everybody of that every single day through this campaign. And the fact that I've spent my entire life trying to pay that community back for what they did for me. I mean, I joined the United States Marine Corps. I deployed to Iraq. I deployed to Afghanistan twice. I really did everything I could to try to pay everybody back. And the thing that burns me up is, people wonder, well, what's motivating me to do this race? It's thinking that I was serving that community and taking care of everyone who took care of me. And then watching country club politicians like Josh Hawley literally wage war on the neighborhood I grew up in. And if you go back there today, the first house I lived in is an empty lot. The one I joined the Marine Corps out of is boarded up to keep the squatters out. The store where my little sister and I used to go buy candy and Mountain Dew refills for my mom was shut down because it's been robbed so many times it can't get insurance. I'm running this campaign, taking no money from corporate PACs, no money from federal lobbyists, no money from big pharma executives, no money from big fossil fuel executives, because I'm tired of those people stripping the communities like the one I grew up in for parts, and the only people I ever want to owe are those in that old neighborhood.
So you mentioned this, but one of the reasons you've emerged as the clear frontrunner in the Democratic primary is the fact that organized labor groups have backed your candidacy. Not only the AFL-CIO of Missouri, but scores of individual labor unions. So as somebody who is part of two labor unions, one who has endorsed you, SCIU, and one who has endorsed Carla May, CWA, I'd be interested in how you've been personally affected by unions throughout your professional and personal life, and why you think you're the best candidate for labor.
In that neighborhood that I grew up in, a union job was your golden ticket to stay in the middle class. Like, that's it. That's what people strived for, because that meant you were going to be safe, you were going to be protected, and you had power. And, my entire campaign is about fundamentally changing who has power in this country. As for me personally, my sister was in a teachers union that protected her, very strongly. My wife is unionized. She's part of the bargaining committee down at her workplace. Like, this is personal to me. Labor is personal to me because I truly believe that the only way we're going to have power in this country, all of us, against these massive corporations who, buy off politicians to take advantage of us, the only way we get power is by being able to come together and organize and come together as one and stand in solidarity. So this is personally important for me. Professionally, it's important to me. And I think it's really the front line in the fight to keep America and Missouri as places where you have a strong middle class and people can have dreams and opportunity.
Hawley has spent the past few months trying to showcase some commonalities with organized labor, and I believe he even received some kind words from Teamsters President Sean O'Brien at the Republican National Convention. To me, that's not surprising that he's taking this strategy, because a lot of rank-and-file union workers, especially in the trades, are socially conservative, and he may be trying to make inroads with them. But what's your message to union members who may be curious about Josh Hawley, about why they should support somebody like you in November?
Look, Josh Hawley, he's a fraud, right? We all know that. We saw him pump his fist on January 6th when he thought it was going to get him some power, and then skitter out the back door minutes later when things got real and he was like, oh, God, now I'm in trouble, right? And that's what his political career is right now, right? He was a country club Republican in 2018 when he first ran for this office, and only got 51% of the vote, I might add. Like, not a big victory. He was supported by Jack Danforth, our moderate former senator. That was his persona. He lost all that after January 6th, and he's trying to redefine himself. But he's still the same guy who was packed by billionaires like Peter Thiel, right? I mean, if you want to talk about a guy who's anti-labor, some people might think, oh, wait, maybe Roy Blunt, former Republican senator here. Well, when the CHIPS Act, when there was a vote to protect prevailing wage in the CHIPS Act, Roy Blunt actually voted to protect prevailing wage, and Josh Hawley voted against it.
Yeah, not to get
right?
into inside baseball, but like the Blunts have been a little bit more labor friendly throughout their career than Hawley has. But continue.
Well, significantly more. And so that's just it. Like, the guy's a fraud who's trying to redefine himself, but he's the guy who, when he was attorney general, one of the first things he did was lead a lawsuit to make sure more than 200,000 Missourians would lose their overtime pay. That's 36,000 here in St. Louis County area, another 15,000 in St. Charles County. Like, that is the money that in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, we used to buy our kids a second pair of shoes during the school year, something my parents struggled with. It's the money we used to take care of each other like, people took care of my family. So he's been anti-worker from day one. I don't really care what happens at the national level. Like, Missouri labor understands and knows that I'm the candidate that's going to protect them. I'm the only one that's going to vote for the PRO Act, Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which gives us the ability to organize.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Lucas Kunce, a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to our conversation with Lucas Kunce, a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. If you get the nomination next month, you will likely be running alongside the ballot initiative legalizing abortion up to what's known as fetal viability. And that's defined in the proposal as when a healthcare professional determines, quote, there's a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. Now, Republicans who have come on this show have said Missourians won't accept this amendment because they feel that this amendment goes too far. Why do you think that they are wrong and maybe would accept putting abortion rights in the Constitution?
Missourians have been trying to claw back power for themselves for a while now through the initiative petition process. I mean, we see it over and over again, right? We passed a minimum wage that's $5 over the federal level. We overturned the anti-union right to work legislation, which, by the way, Josh Hawley supported. We overturned that 68%, 32%, right? Huge margins. We expanded Medicaid. We legalized weed. Like, Missourians are in a position right now where they are tired of control freak politicians telling them what to do and taking away their rights. And there's no better example on that than this abortion petition and Josh Hawley being on the ballot, right? Like, both of those are positions where Missourians are going to have the opportunity to take back their rights, and they're going to do it. I mean, Josh Hawley is crazy on this issue. I mean, he thinks that in vitro fertilization and certain types of contraception or abortion, he's built a family business with his wife around taking away people's rights to access reproductive health care. I mean, the guy goes so far as to say that he thinks no-fault divorce should disappear. The ability for people to get out of dangerous marriages should be gone. And it's just like, that is extreme, controlling political stuff that nobody in this state wants.
Let's shift to foreign policy for a bit. If you were in the United States Senate now, would you support U.S. aid to Israel, especially since the military invasion of Gaza sparked worldwide and nationwide condemnation?
We all saw what happened on October 7th. It was a real unchecked aggression and tragedy. Kids at a music festival getting attacked, hostages being taken, thousands being killed. And I believe Israel had a right to defend itself. And what we've seen over the ensuing months is a situation where, unfortunately, and really sadly, a lot more innocent people have died, particularly in Palestine and Gaza and also in Israel. And so, for me, I think we really need to get into a negotiated ceasefire. The United States should use their leverage there. I've done U.S. arms control negotiations with NATO and Russia. I know we have a lot of levers we can pull, and some of it is just showing up and getting the sides to do the right thing. And so I think we have an opportunity to get the hostages back and to get to negotiated ceasefire, and we shouldn't give up on that.
Should one of the sticks potentially be you either go to the negotiating table, by you, I mean Israel, or we stop giving you weapons and we stop giving you aid?
I think we need to consider what we need to consider, and I think there's a lot going on right now, and, one of the things I learned in our arms control negotiations is that ultimatums don't really work. You really just have to have the conversations. You have to have both sides willing to do it. And right now you got what appears to be a pretty bad actor in Netanyahu, and you got pretty bad actors in Hamas, and the people who are suffering is everybody in the middle.
On Ukraine, Senator Hawley has been an outspoken critic of continued aid to repel Russia's invasion. He and other Republicans have argued that the aid is wasteful when there's no coherent plan for victory. What do you think about Hawley's position on this issue? And would you place any conditions for your support on Ukraine aid if you replace him in the Senate?
You know, I spent 13 years negotiating with Russians. Like, I've sat across the table personally from their deputy foreign minister. I went overseas many times to do that and negotiated with our NATO allies on this. Like, we saw the buildup coming. We saw the war coming. And, like, it is absolutely cartoonish for these guys to act like Russia isn't a threat. And it's even worse for them to want to just neglect it, because what that's going to do is that's going to lead to much more expensive boots-on-the-ground war in the future. And so here, it's like they always say, sometimes I forget the quote, but it's like, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Like, what we have to do here is make sure that this doesn't get worse and contain it. And I'm the world's biggest advocate against forever wars, right? Like, I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I watched us light $6.4 trillion on fire over there. These same politicians who now don't want to spend, to keep this contained, wanted to spend forever to protect, investments by oil companies. And it's absolutely crazy to me that you guys are so cartoonish about this, especially when they all want to go to war with China over Taiwan, which is going to cost an obscene amount of money when we should be investing, any money we would put towards a war there in the next generation of American energy and production, so that China's afraid to go to war with us.
That was actually going to be my next question. Do you think that there's anything that America could do to successfully prepare Taiwan for an invasion when China has a much bigger and more sophisticated military? I'm not saying we should, take away all their weapons, but it seems like we would have to invest hundreds of billions of dollars to allow them to successfully repel an invasion.
No, I mean, what we need to do right now is we need to make stuff in America again, because that's what gives us leverage. It gives us good union jobs, it gives us production and national independence, but it also gives us international leverage over, supply chains and markets that we don't have right now because we outsourced everything. And I've literally seen this personally. I went over and over again when Russia was building up and modernizing its military to meet with our NATO allies. And over again, these guys, I would say, these guys are building up. You can see another war coming. Again, this is after they'd already invaded Crimea and the Donbass. So, things had already happened. And again, our European allies didn't take hard positions because they were hooked on cheap Russian natural gas, right? They were buying gas from Russia, and they're like, well, that is really scary. Could you guys send over more troops and equipment to protect us from that threat that we're funding? Which is kind of crazy, right? That the American taxpayer is doing that. And so what you see right there is you see that the ability of a market to control foreign countries and keep them from interdicting in something before it happens. And so what we need to do is build out the next generation of energy right here in America, the next generation of industry. We need to produce things again so that China doesn't want to go to war over Taiwan because they're worried that they're going to lose that supply chain.
I think they want to go to war with Taiwan because they think Taiwan is part of China, though. It seems like that's less about that.
But they're not going to want to do it if they're going to lose their supply chain.
That's true. So we got a couple of other listener questions, including this one from My Beans on Reddit. What are Kunce's thoughts on public transportation, high-speed rail, pedestrian safety, and car dependency in Missouri? And I guess I'll add a question to that. What would you do as a senator to further those things that My Beans from Reddit wants?
I mean, what we have to do, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, is we need to invest in the next generation of production and the next generation of energy, and we should be doing that in Missouri. I have a Marshall Plan to build out the next generation of energy right here in Missouri, to make our houses more efficient, to make our automobiles and our transportation more efficient, and put a bunch of good union workers to work. We have the capacity to do that. And, as far as where we go on transportation, I mean, a lot of that's related to infrastructure. And so this is where I guess me and Roy Blunt have very different opinion of what a U.S. Senator's job is compared to Josh Hawley. Roy Blunt brought $350 million a year in projects back to this state. And he'd work with people on both sides of the aisle, including Emmanuel Cleaver, to bring projects to this state.
Through the earmarking process, by the way.
Pardon me?
Through the earmarking process.
Yeah, that's right, through the earmarking process. And Josh Hawley refuses to do that. So while Roy Blunt would bring $350 million a year, we have lost that because Hawley refuses to mark that money for our state. And I think that's criminal, and I think it's why we're in such a bad position. And, my top job as a U.S. Senator is to do things like bring that money back, but also vote for infrastructure bills like Hawley voted against, vote for building out the next generation of energy here and things like that. It's all about investment, and it's investment that he's been unwilling and refused to take.
We got another listener question from Ariel Somersaults from Reddit. By the way, don't you love these usernames from Reddit? I mention this all the time on the show. That's the best part.
Yeah, they don't like put their real names at the end.
No, all monikers.
Russian bots, man.
You know, they may either be Russian bots, or we need one that's like Lucas Kunce is terrible from Reddit. But then you would probably know what the question is. It would probably be a troll question. What policies would you pursue to help St. Louis maintain its aging public housing stock, especially senior living facilities? You kind of touched on this in your last answer about rehabbing homes, but I think this is specifically about public housing. What would you do on that front?
You know, one of the things that we have really lost every year, there's less and less of it since the 1970s, is community development block grants. And, you know, it's something that my representative, Emmanuel Cleaver, is big on. It's something that we used to have money here for, and it's a way for local communities to, you know, problem solve and take federal money and solve local problems exactly like this. And the fact that that's so underfunded is just a real tragedy for me. So I think that, you know, we need to reinvest in things like community development block grants that people locally can use to solve problems like this that they know about and that, you know, the federal government doesn't necessarily know about.
Lucas Kunce is a Democratic contender for Missouri's U.S. Senate seat. We had his main opponent, State Senator Carla May, on the show a couple of weeks ago, and you can listen to that interview at stlpr.org or wherever you get your podcast. Lucas, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Catch you next time.
And joining us now to talk about Kunce's interview is Sarah Kellogg, who covers all things state government and state politics for St. Louis Public Radio. Sarah, welcome back.
Hi, Jason. Good to be back.
So we both interviewed Kunce in 2022 together when he ran against Trudy Busch Valentine. Do you think he's changed his style or approach since that point in time?
I do think he has. I think he kind of had it dialed up to 11, I think, in 2022 when it came to that campaign. There was definitely an intensity there. I think there's probably a comfortableness of being a candidate. I also will say that was a nasty campaign between those two candidates in 2022 versus now where I feel like he and Senator May are, there's the likeness there. There's a good, at least rapport. I think they like each other. So there's not really a negativeness that was there. So I think that's also impacted how he has run this campaign. There's kind of a self-assuredness, I think, and it's translated well where he's sticking to what he knows, and it's not super, super intense.
So Kunce is definitely the favorite in this primary just because his fundraising advantage over May is just so massive. But him not endorsing Vice President Harris for president, which was reported on earlier this week by the Post-Dispatch, but you heard in our interview he didn't do it with me. Mm-hmm. It's provoked some criticism online with the caveat that Twitter or X isn't real life. Was that a mistake for Kunce not to publicly back the VP there?
I'm not sure that it is. Again, Harris, though she is on track to become the nominee, she isn't the official nominee yet. I think that the fact that he's more focused on his own race, I think is a good answer to that. It's I'm worried about my own race right now before I worry about the presidential race. I think also, if correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe he's a delegate. So there's not really who am I going to vote for in the convention to be the nominee? So I don't think it's a huge mishap, but I think, weeks go by, people won't remember that really.
Now, let's be clear. Harris is not going to win Missouri, but I do see a scenario where Harris helps people like Kunce or Senator May by hypercharging turnout among Black and female voters, especially with the abortion initiative likely to make the ballot. What do you think about that possibility?
I do see kind of a greater energy among Black people and women and LGBTQ people, as far as voting for Harris, and that could trickle down. I do think you're right. I don't think Harris is going to win Missouri, but I do think that there's kind of that bump. But I honestly, and I said this before, I think the biggest bump is abortion ballot, because that will affect Missourians. So people who are getting out to vote for that, I think that along with Harris could be definitely bumps for both Kunce or May or, the Democratic governor candidate, whoever it could be. I see kind of being a boon for them.
Very quickly, for his part, Hawley is expecting a competitive and expensive race. Do you think Missourians, though, are going to be turned off by his controversies, especially what happened on January 6, 2021?
I think the fundraising that Kunce has gathered is evident enough that there are people that have been turned off by Hawley in his past 6 years as senator, but I just don't know if it's going to be enough to change the outcome of the race, because I know Hawley is the favorite, but I definitely think that's definitely, he's probably lost some voters that he had back in when he was elected.
Back in a moment. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. There's a lot of things you could say about Maria Chappelle-Nadal, but in her 16 years serving in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate, she could never be accused of being boring or not being at the center of some of the biggest issues affecting the state. Chappelle-Nadal not only played a central role in the debates over education policy and radioactive waste exposure, but she was a defining voice in Jefferson City for a criminal justice overhaul after a Ferguson police officer killed Michael Brown in 2014. Nearly 4 years out of electoral politics, Chappelle-Nadal filed to run for Missouri's 1st Congressional District primary against Congresswoman Cori Bush and St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell. This is the second time Chappelle-Nadal has run for the seat, as she lost in 2016 to then-Congressman Lacy Clay. Joining us now in studio is former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal, a University City resident who has represented portions of Mid and North St. Louis County in the Missouri General Assembly. Senator, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
So you've represented portions of the 1st Congressional District from 2005 through the end of 2021. You were even a national figure after the Ferguson protest movement. But thus far, Bush and Bell are outraising you by a lot in terms of fundraising. Why hasn't your campaign been able to get more traction?
I started really late in February of this year, and usually you do not start a campaign so late, but I thought it was incumbent that I put my name in the ring for this seat. And I recognize, well, I don't have the same bank as my opponents. What I do know is that people are relying on me to tell everyone what is important in this race, and I'm supported by a lot of people, not only from my previous district that I represented, but throughout St. Louis.
There's been some conjecture, at least nationally, that this race could be a referendum on Bush's criticism of Israel. But this is a plurality African-American district, and both polling and anecdotal commentary indicates that a candidate's opinion on what's happening in Gaza may not be top of mind for black voters, especially older black voters who have a higher propensity to vote. So would it be wrong to say that this race is solely about Israel based off talking with people in this district?
Absolutely not. When I'm out in the streets talking to voters, every single day they're talking about their housing, they're talking about jobs, they're talking about education, and most importantly, they're talking about crime. And so there are varying issues that people care about, and Israel just happens to be one of them. And frankly, for a portion of my former district, there are people who rightfully believe that Israel should be of concern. It is not the concern of 100% of the voters who will go out and vote on August 6th, however.
Yes, because for the 1st District does have a significant Jewish population, though a lot of the Jewish community in St. Louis lives in the 2nd Congressional District, especially after redistricting. So I do want to ask you, because before he bowed out of the presidential race, Biden said that the only way forward was for a 2-state solution that features a majority Arab Muslim state of Palestine established alongside a majority Jewish state of Israel. Do you support that idea?
I always have. When I was in Israel in 2009, I understood that it was very important for there to be a 2-state solution. And let me tell you, it's not a new idea.
No, not at all.
This is what multiple presidents have talked about, both Democrat and Republican, is having a 2-state solution. And I think that's what's fair. I think what people are looking for right now is a release of those who are captured right now.
The hostages.
The hostages.
Right. But is there any indication, though, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would want a 2-state solution? I mean, I think he's been trying to undermine that idea as long as he's been involved in Israeli politics, going back to when Yitzhak Rabin was in office. So what confidence do you have that he would actually push for any sort of self-determination for the Palestinians as long as he's in power.
Well, let me tell you, Netanyahu has become more conservative over the course of years. When he was elected around 2009, 2010, he was closer to the idea of having a two-state solution. And over the years, he's gotten more conservative. And that is what the conflict is between where he's at and where we are at in the United States and other places throughout the world.
Do you think that there is going to need to be new leadership in both Gaza and Israel in order for there to be some sort of peaceful resolution to this horrible violence that we're seeing?
On the Palestinian side, I see that there needs to be new leadership, absolutely, because where we're at right now is simply not working. However, I think for the Israel side of things, there's a lot of debate in Israel, and they're going to have to figure that out, what kind of leadership they want.
Yeah, because I don't think Netanyahu is popular even in Israel, and there's kind of an assumption that as soon as there's a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, he could be gone.
It's a house divided in Israel right now.
I want to talk about Ukraine. Would you continue to support providing military assistance for Ukraine's push to repel Russia's invasion?
Absolutely.
Is there any benchmarks that you would be looking for to make sure that our aid is actually being used effectively? Because we gave them a lot of aid right before their counteroffensive, and the counteroffensive was a total failure. So I do understand the mindset that we have to have accountability for what we give them. So what do you think about that?
I think we do need to have measurements that are in place because people back at home are wondering if we're sending all of this money to the Ukraine to protect themselves, then what are we getting out of it? Hopefully, the big phrase is democracy. We want democracy throughout the world, but we also want something that's sustaining. We cannot just freely, continuously send money and not know what the results are and if they're in line in what we're trying to do. But with that said, we have to continue to support the Ukraine, and especially with their.
It's not the Ukraine. I got to say that.
I apologize.
As somebody who is half Ukrainian, calling it the Ukraine is not correct. So I need to point that out.
This is the second time someone's told me that, and I do apologize.
It's okay. I forgive you, Senator. But let's shift to domestic issues. It has almost been 10 years since Michael Brown's shooting death in a couple of weeks, and I think there have been efforts on and off on a federal level to overhaul criminal justice statutes, but I don't think they've been able to make it past the finish line. It's been primarily a state and local responsibility. What would you want to do in Congress, specifically in that space, that you think would make police more accountable and more respected within the African American community?
Well, I want to speak from both sides of the spectrum when I answer that question. First of all, we need to be investing in the lives of young people who get involved in crime very early on. In the last 2 years, what I've been doing is reading a lot of police reports and have found that there are large numbers of people, young people, who have been engaged in crime ongoingly. On the other side of the spectrum, I understand that we have some bad apples in our law enforcement.
We just saw that in Illinois with the death of Sonia Massey as well.
Absolutely. And she's the one who called the police. And when you look at that video, it's very traumatizing because she thought everything was okay. And it was not okay. And she lost her life for that.
Yeah. So is there any policies that you think could be done on a federal level that you think could improve both sides of the spectrum that you just talked about?
Well, I think where we need to start off is the consent decree in Ferguson. One of my opponents who served on the Ferguson City Council,
St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell, for our listeners,
did not vote for it. And that's troubling.
I think he did eventually, didn't he?
Eventually, perhaps, but he did not originally. And that is something that's quite concerning. And when you look at his advertising, it's really misleading as well. But the other part of it, I think we really need to have a stronger relationship between the federal government and local law enforcement agencies. And to some degree, we have that. But, even Senate Bill 5 that we passed in 2015, which was a response to the Ferguson uprising, a lot of that is still not adhered to. And it's troubling because even later on in 2016, there were municipalities in St. Louis County that violated individuals' civil rights.
Yeah, and Senate Bill 5, by the way, the primary aspect of that was lowering the amount of fines and fees that could be in a municipality's budget. But you make an interesting point about the consent decree. One criticism of that approach by the federal government is that it was only applying to Ferguson and not anywhere else in St. Louis County or St. Louis, given that even wealthy and well-funded municipalities have violated people's civil rights before. Do you think that was a mistake by President Obama's Justice Department just to target Ferguson?
I think he was looking at what was systemic at the time, not knowing the complexity of St. Louis County. We have 80 municipalities. And I think that kind of policy would be suitable for places like Riverview and St. Anne, where there is a lot of problems when it comes to police harassment of individuals. I'm thinking about Kajami Powell right now. That was a St. Louis, St. Anne, eventually he was a St. Anne police officer, but he started off in St. Louis City, and Kajami Powell has died because of police violence.
We're talking with former state senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal. She is one of 3 major candidates in the Democratic primary for the 1st Congressional District. You mentioned housing in your first answer, and I would be interested to know what you would do as a member of Congress to help create a more robust residential and commercial housing stock within the district in a way that I think could be beneficial for current and potential new residents alike. And I say that because you want to make sure that you're not pushing people out through gentrification, but there clearly is an issue in the 1st Congressional District with housing and suitable housing stock. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
All you have to do is go to North St. Louis and look at all the vacant homes, the formerly beautiful brick homes, if they were still, in a good condition, would be upwards of $2 or $3 million in Clayton right now. But the fact remains is these older homes and areas that have been neglected for so long really deserve attention in another way. And the answer could be multiple things. One, we need to rehab some homes that are worth saving. There are some homes that we can't save. And when you look at the housing problem, you also have to look at their transportation challenges. All of these things come into play. And so my idea of the federal government doing something proactive is by working with HUD, working with the Missouri Housing Development Commission, which I was a staffer on for many years for the former lieutenant governor, and really draw down the dollars, not just to benefit people who have always been developing housing, but also for jurisdictions and even churches that get involved in housing, and making sure that some of our neighborhoods are not such an eyesore the way they are right now.
So you've been outspoken for years, maybe even a decade or more, about radioactive waste in the St. Louis area and its danger to the general population. But efforts to provide restitutions for people in the St. Louis area has not gone anywhere, even when people across the ideological spectrum, like Senator Josh Hawley, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Congresswoman Bush, have advocated for that bill. Why do you think you would be able to do a better job of advocating for that?
Well, I'm a legislator. I think what's different between myself and Ann Wagner and Josh Hawley is that I actually served in the Missouri legislature for 16 years and served in the executive branch for another 4 years, which makes up my 20 years of public service. But we have to understand that in order to pass legislation, you have to be able to count numbers and understand what what you're talking about. People are looking at or looking for a legislator who not only can metabolize information but can articulate it. I have been working on the radioactive waste issue for 14 years now, and I am one of the policy experts in the entire state, and I'm proud of that. And when I was doing my 100 town hall meetings between 2015 and 2017, there was not a voice from Josh Hawley. There was not a voice from Ann Wagner. And frankly, there were not voices in my own party that were talking about radioactive waste and why it's so important when it comes to the livelihood of so many citizens who live in the 1st Congressional District. Most of the radioactive waste is in North County, and we have a high number of people who have either gotten cancer or died from cancer. And one of those people who died just recently was Tammy Holland. And I was able to interview her like I've interviewed 1,000 other people on this issue.
Tammy Holland was a radio personality who passed away from cancer, I think, last Saturday. Continue.
Yes, but I was able to interview her like I did so many other people, and I did a brief assessment of the different places that she lived and associated that with watersheds and tributaries, and that's what I do. That's what I've been doing. Just because I have not been elected for the last 4 years, I have continued in the mission of educating people on the issue of radioactive waste. When we were in our homes during COVID, I wrote a syllabus about what measures we need to take when it comes to radioactive waste to give a tool to people who want to learn about the issue and advocate for the issue in an educated way. And I think that's one of the flaws that Cori Bush, frankly, is having, is that she cannot articulate the issue and the importance of having some of these resources come to St. Louis.
In the last minute or two we have, I want to talk to you about Vice President Kamala Harris likely being the Democratic nominee for president. In fact, Missouri Democratic Party Chairman Russ Carnahan wrote earlier this week, since President Biden's endorsement of Vice President Harris, we've seen an incredible surge of energy here in Missouri, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Obama-Biden ticket nearly carried Missouri in 2008. Both of us were around in 2008. Obama only lost Missouri by like 4,000 or 5,000 votes. Is that what you're hearing too in the 1st Congressional District? And if so, how do you think that changes the primary on August 6th?
You know what? I have to tell you that I love President Biden. And, anyone could have told me anything about him, but I was going to vote for him no matter what. With that said, I think the energy that we have seen of Kamala becoming closer to being the nominee for president is exciting. I mean, you see so many young people on social media who are talking about how proud they are to vote for the first time.
I mean, have you seen the memes about how Kamala Harris is brat, by the way?
Yes, I did see that.
A Charlie XCX, and I was ahead of the brat curve, by the way. I just want to point that out to people, but continue.
Yes, but she is a brilliant, beautiful, phenomenal woman. She's, there are a lot of women, especially black women, who were upset when there was this push to take out Biden. But I think having Kamala reinvigorates the base of the party, and it expands the base, frankly. But women want to see another woman. We want to see a qualified woman. We want to see someone who is of color. We want to have someone who is going to champion the issues like women's reproductive rights, who's going to champion issues when it comes to violence and crime. And I could put all my faith in Kamala. And I think the people who I talk to every day are inspired by her. And though we love Joe, we love President Biden, we need to win in November. It is critical that we win. And the other option is just not manageable.
Former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal is a Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. You can listen to in-depth interviews with Congresswoman Cori Bush and St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell at stlpr.org or wherever you get your St. Louis on the Air podcast. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we're pleased to welcome back Sarah Kellogg, who covers state government and state politics for St. Louis Public Radio. Sarah, Chappelle-Nadal has raised very little money for this race compared to Bush or Bell, but she's well-known and well-connected in University City, a big population center in the 1st District. How does she factor into this race?
I think she factors in kind of as a spoiler to Bell more than anything. I think if you're looking at the people who are looking at, the people who are dedicated to voting for Cori Bush are voting for Cori Bush, and the people that might be thinking of an alternative are now have two options to choose from, whether it's Bell or Chappelle-Nadal. So ultimately, I feel like she detracts from Bell's campaign more than Bush, even though she had criticisms for both candidates, but also her criticism for Bush was, I think, in one, maybe two. And so it isn't more that it felt like she was more, which she should be, advocating for her own campaign versus why it shouldn't be Bush. But I think ultimately she kind of is acting like a spoiler.
It should be noted that all three candidates we've talked to for this race, Bell, Bush, and Chappelle-Nadal, have now embraced Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic presidential standard bearer. How do you think Harris's ascension will affect this contest, and especially since she recently spoke out for a ceasefire in Gaza?
I don't know how much of an impact that's going to have, mainly because that would be a question for the November ballot rather than the primary. And that's what this contest is. The winner of this contest in August is who is going to win in November. So right now, this is the campaign for the Democratic candidates. And I don't know how much of a bump, yes, there is an invigoration there, but I don't know how much that's going to translate to votes in August compared to votes in November.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that just because Harris is going to become the presidential nominee, that means voters in the 1st District are automatically going to vote for one of the two female candidates. It seems like it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. I actually was watching Bell campaign in Normandy yesterday, and he has plenty of female supporters that I saw talking with him.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
As someone who covered this race in 2022, what do you think is at stake on August 6th, especially for progressives in St. Louis who have accumulated so much tangible power since 2020?
I think that is who will be affected probably the most, is to see how popular the progressive movement, progressive slate is appealing to people who might be a little more moderate or a little more Democrat versus progressive. And I think that ultimately, if Bush doesn't prevail, that could be a big blow to that. So, and again, we've talked about the likelihood of this. I hate to predict elections. I do think that if she were to lose, that would be a big blow to kind of that slate when it comes to, people who support the squad and kind of that slate of policies.
And I was talking with a lot of people about this race this week, and everybody agrees it's going to come down to which candidate can get the most support in North St. Louis County and North St. Louis City. There are other parts of the district, South City, there's in St. Louis County, like Creve Coeur area, but that's where the ball game is. And it's whoever can get, if Bell can reduce Bush's share of the black vote, I think below 55%, I think he has a chance. And if he can't, then I think Bush is going to be favored. That's my observation? Is that Sarah Kellogg's observation?
Well, I think you would know more than me on this one, but I think that ultimately you have to factor in the popularity or the bump that does come with incumbency. And it takes a lot to have, change a voter's mind. And so the question is whether or not he's changing enough people's minds of not only not to vote for Bush, but to vote for him. Because maybe they're not happy with some of the things she's done, but they could look at other things that they do like. So I think there's a lot needs to happen in order to shift that vote.
It is going to be quite the race to watch. It'll be the marquee contest in the St. Louis region. And Sarah Kellogg is St. Louis Public Radio state government and politics reporter who will be watching this race closely. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
You got it, Jason.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich, and our production intern is Roche Hemmings.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.